towards the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of guidance. So, Piro Murshid Inayat Khan, oh, there's a picture of him that is behind me right now. So, this is an Indian Sufi master, and my engagement with Sufism is based on the message that he brought, which he was the first to say that there is nothing new under the sun, and that the Sufi wisdom path has always existed. And no, I can't reach to put it back, so I'm going to put him in front of me. Oh, I should put him up on the table in front of me. So he said so many different things about what Sufism is. And each time he said it, he would say it like, this is the one thing that it is. So Sufi comes from Sufia, which means wisdom. So Sufism is the path of wisdom. That really covers everything. Wisdom means that we engage our intellectual understanding, all of the knowledge and experience that we gather and meander through in this life, in this world, in this humanness. And we weave all of that intellectual understanding and experience, we weave that into the ground of truth, which is God. And we also pay attention to what he would call intuition, or that we might describe as the spirit of guidance. That knowledge is not wisdom in itself. Wisdom has to include everything that is beyond our human intellect capacity and value system and conditioning. Now, with that, if we are on the path of wisdom, of really wanting to perceive ourselves and the world and life itself and God by whatever name and form we understand her, him, it to be, then we are stepping out of our limited self perspective and stepping into a field of perfection. The God view is infinite. The human view is so tiny. That's not a disparaging thing. It's just true. That's not like our view is exactly what it's supposed to be. We're not supposed to perceive and understand everything about creation. We are supposed to navigate life and our own humanness from our human perspective, and also to know that it's limited and to know that there's so much beyond. These questions about balance, about fear and love, about seeing what's happening in the world and experiencing our own lives and feeling distressed about it, feeling embroiled in it. Those things are based on our human view, not the God view. Again, that's not bad. It's how we work. It's how we are in this life experience. Sufism, the path of wisdom, invites us to expand our view, our understanding, our assumptions, our expectations. And because Murshid also says Sufism is the path of love. It is the love that inspires and motivates and nourishes us in our unfolding into a wider perspective of wisdom. So we are each invited to really explore what is it that we truly love? Because having a close relationship with our own understanding of what we truly love helps us shape our ideals and helps motivate us to engage in life according to our highest values. Sufism is not tied to, beholden to, or limited to any particular religious views or doctrines. It is defined and shaped according to this field of wisdom. So there are plenty, plenty of Sufi schools, Sufi orders, Sufi organizations that are teaching some very religious specific practices and religious specific instructions. And there are some, and certainly Inayat Khan's Sufi message is one of them, that emphasizes the reality that wisdom cannot be limited to any particular sect or doctrine, and that each person, each human being has a direct connection, or at least the option, the availability, the possibility of utilizing the direct connection to the spirit of guidance, to the God reality, the divine reality. And the forms and shapes that that takes for each person is unique. So, most of us, not all, but most, looking around at who's in here, most of us had some religious culture in our upbringing. We had some kind of religious home of origin. That is, the religion of the family. That was maybe some of us grew up in a church or in a synagogue, or even some of us may have grown up in an atheistic home, which is also a religious culture. That is also a specific culture about religion in the home. And each of us in our life experience have our own unique personal dynamic unfolding of exploring, individuating, rejecting, embracing, uh, being curious, questioning, trying different spiritual or religious faith paths, uh, putting them all aside or shutting them all down or whatever it is. And by the time anyone shows up in a Sufi conversation, a Sufi community, Sufi context of whatever form, there's so much experience that is already defining and describing that personal landscape of the soul's unfoldment. Every one of us, if given the time and opportunity, we could spend an hour listening to each person describing the details of the spiritual life process so far this lifetime, of where you started and how you feel about that and what works for you about that and what doesn't, and what are the things, what are the wounds and the disappointments and the pains that we each gather around those experiences and those cultures, and then each of us in our maturing, I'm going to call it maturing. I hope that's true. I hope that's what it is. That each of us in our maturing discovers and shapes or finds or pursues the communities, the contexts, the cultures that really resonate most beautifully with our own hearts, our own minds, our souls, our personalities, our needs, the communities and cultures of spiritual exploration that feel safe, available, resonant, useful, effective. And so Sufism is shaped and defined by everyone who participates in it. The forms of God, the forms of practice, the texts, the life experience, every detail that arrives with the individual murids, students, all of those things define what Sufism is. There are no defining characteristics of Sufism until there are people populating those characteristics. So Inayat Khan's Sufi message was initially defined and described by his experience, by his background, by his religious upbringing and culture and curiosity and study, exploration, devotion, and experience. And as he began to teach and to work with his own murids and community, human society, his way of teaching and the forms that he conveyed reflected the characteristics of the audience, of the murids, of the community that he was serving. And that's how it's continuing, that each of us that embodies the message in some way and has conversations with others, our way of sharing it and describing it includes all of that culture and our own sensibilities and preferences. Fear is an interesting theme because I'm just shifting modes for a moment. I'm almost done talking for right now. Anytime fear arises in any context, it is our job to look at whether it is a realistic fear or an unrealistic fear. My brain just bopped to a series of unfortunate events. And if you do not know the series of unfortunate events, I highly recommend them if you have a dark sense of humor. And I highly do not recommend them if you are sensitive to such things. They are uh, kind of children's stories, but they're dark and I love them. Uh, anyway, there are realistic fears and there are unrealistic fears. And there are fears that are empowering and motivating, and there are fears that are debilitating and um, paralyzing. What is the form of fear that you're experiencing in any given moment or any time a fear arises? And it is necessary to assess with as much wisdom as possible what form of fear that is, Where does that come from and what is it doing? What purpose is it serving? Is it useful or not? And part of the path of wisdom is mastery, is self mastery. It is knowing what our values are, what the realities are, what the life circumstances are, and making conscientious, intentional choices, not just about what we do, but also how we think and how we feel and how we relate to and manage our own inner experience, our own inner landscape of emotions and beliefs and values and preferences and aversions. And we want to be as aware of those things as possible so that we can be as in charge of them as possible. That's the path of mastery, which is also what Sufism is. So it's true, fear and love are not the same thing, but they are also not opposites. They often do go together. They are often aspects of a shared experience. So I think it's very simplistic to say that there's either fear or love. That is just not true. And a lot of fear is based on very real phenomenon, evidence, data. And a lot of it is whipped up, amplified, exacerbated by the conditioning and the uh, the dramas. Pir Moinadine, Karl Jablonski, who is the successor of Murshid Sam, who was a murid of Inayat Khan, so we're two generations down from Inayat Khan. Moinadine said, there are those who love Dharma, and there are those who love drama. Which are you? I added the which are you. His thing was just this simple thing. Like, do you love the Dharma? That is the teachings, that is the wisdom, that is the embodied spiritual perspective and wisdom culture? Or do you love the whipped up and oh, it's so exciting for things to be a disaster? Okay, pausing recording. So the specific question that showed up is there a distinction between the divine masculine and the divine feminine in Sufism? I was describing at the beginning of my first soapbox talk, or somewhere in there, about how Sufism is comprised of all the characteristics of the participants. So each person who touches into the Sufi path will have their own perspective about divine masculine or divine feminine, or no consideration about that at all. And all of that is fine. Now, if we're looking in a really big view, the divine has no interest in the distinguishing between masculine and feminine on a God level. That's just such a ludicrous notion that just doesn't make any sense at all. That it's the one towards the one. Is the one masculine or feminine? Yes. No. Yes. Now, that's not useful for our humanness. Like that's true. That's the reality. God is beyond masculine and feminine. The divine reality is beyond masculine and feminine. And our humanness, each of us individually, really, I want to say need, but that's not sweepingly true. A whole lot of us need to relate to God in a personal way. And the distinctions of masculine and feminine are useful for us in our humanness. not for everyone, but for a lot of us. And you can see, you can feel what happens when I, Sarah, in my humanness, anytime I'm teaching and I say something about God, if I have a choice about using a pronoun, I will say she. And I can feel the effect in the people who hear it. It's it's palpable that I'm just cruising along talking about God, 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 and then I say she, and there's like the ooh that happens in a room. And I go, how amazing is that? That's the response when I use a feminine pronoun for God. Um, I personally think that's a problem in our humanness. I think that is a really central theme problem in our human evolution. Not because I actually believe that God is limited to a she, but because I think our human concepts and our value system and our conditioning as a society have been shaped so much with the assumption and the default mode of the masculine. It is not that we have a default mode of a gender neutral, all inclusive. We don't. We have a default mode of masculine. That is not woven into the fabric of Sufism in the culture that I participate in. There are definitely there are definitely many, many Sufi orders that will only refer to God in the masculine. So that's the vast majority. If you were to ask Murshid if God is masculine or feminine, he would go, well, what do you think? That Sufism doesn't assign that distinction, but honors and respects whatever distinction is useful for the individual. That being said, there are several Sufi orders that draw their inspiration and guidance from Inayat Khan, including Sarati Inayat, which is the order that I am holding and that many of you are participating in formally, like as an affiliation. And we, as an organization, have decided that it is essential to include a focus explicitly on the divine feminine because she is missing in the world. And we feel that it is necessary to bring some healing and your favorite word for today, and balance, and to make sure that we are lifting and celebrating and honoring her with a capital H. We don't do that to the exclusion of anything. We do that with a specific spotlight amplification because right now in our evolution as humanity, that feels like a necessary medicine to bring things into right relation and an inclusive, harmonious, holistic reality. Okay. So, different schools of Sufi thought. Sufi orders, tarikats is it's a tarikat, Tariqat. Tarikat is a Sufi school that is a specific organization, community, a set of teachings, practices. It is a culture that has its own way of engaging with life, of training murids, of sharing teachings, and sharing the journey, the soul's journey. There are more tarikats than I could name right now, and I am quite confident there are many that are unknown that are hidden and that are not publicly identifiable or findable. And they come and go. And so schools of Sufi training arise and then dissipate, and generation to generation. And um, there are there are four primary ones that are most easily identifiable in India and in the Middle East, and then there are so many. I'm sorry, I keep using vague language. I don't want to try to pin any numbers on it because it's more than I can uh, think of or identify. I think it would be fair to say there are and have been hundreds of Sufi orders. How's that for specific? Even just from Inayat Khan, the teacher that I showed you a picture of at the beginning, when he came, he was trained in four different Sufi schools, um, and he integrated those things into his own wisdom body, into his own evolution as a human being. And then when he taught Sufism and formed a curriculum and organization and was traveling widely and teaching for the last 16 years of his life, he formed a new Sufi order that was not limited to or beholden to any of the four orders that he was trained in. Well, he was trained in four. His teacher, his initiator, his murshid, was primarily affiliated with the Chishtiya lineage in India. That that was his primary association. But would he say that he was teaching Chishti Sufism? No, he wouldn't. He would say that he was teaching the path of spiritual liberty. He was teaching the path of love and the path of friendship. He was teaching the path of wisdom for all of humanity, not for just the East or the West, not limited to any particular religion or doctrine, that was inclusive and welcoming to everyone, all paths. So the forms of teachings and practices that he gave run a wide gamut, that some of them, especially from his early teachings, are very Islamic. There are a lot of Arabic language, prayers, zikr, wazifa, darud practices. He gave instruction for his, at least his first murid and maybe others, to study the Quran and to pray 5 times a day. And then in his early teaching, he realized that that was not meeting the needs of the Western Murids community that were drawn to him. So he very quickly started shifting into teaching and giving practices in English or in other forms. He gave some in Sanskrit, and um, he referenced stories and what's the word for that? Kind of parables, like teaching stories, wisdom stories from lots of faith traditions. And he would teach things about Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, all of these um, religious expressions that he described so beautifully as being like the lanterns that are all carrying the light of God in their own unique forms. And so the practices that he gave included a lot of English, affirmations, aphorisms, like little pith wisdom teachings, visualizations, concentrations, meditation, breath practices, recitations of prayer, which he gave prayers that were all in English. Those are not translations. He gave them in English. Um, Techniques for embodied practices, walking practices, how to sit or kneel or how to hold your hands, the energy centers in the body that are similar to chakras, but in Sufism they're called the lataif, and that they're a little bit different. Well, they're a lot different, but similar. Um, so he gave lots of teachings and practices, and he shaped them according to the people that were drawn to him and that he was guiding. Now, there are a lot of different Sufi orders that have their own teachings and practices and culture, and some uh, are very silent, are very sober. We think about the Sufi orders. I probably should have started here. We think about Sufi orders in two kind of major categories. There are the sober Sufis and there are the drunken Sufis. There are the sober ones tend to be more quiet, meditative, disciplined, more rules, less outer engagement, but interactivity and focus. And then the drunken ones tend to be more ecstatic and singing and dancing and using instruments and embodying, more expressive, and and they're ones that are really pursuing discipline and self-management, and others that are more trying to just break out of the constraints of the boxes and limitations of everyday life. So, a lot of Sufi orders, the practices are very Islamic, and almost all of the Sufi orders are um, Islamic in nature, in culture, in the teachings that come from the Quran and from the Hadith, that is the sayings and stories and that are attributed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him. And a lot of Sufi orders have some kind of zikr, but the form of zikr or dhikr Allah, that is the remembrance, the practices that bring you into a remembrance of God. And there are some that sing and dance the phrases of remembrance, and there are others that speak them aloud but do not sing them. There are others that either hold them silently or whisper them. And um, so lots of different forms. One more thing. Oh, this could take forever though. Um, about Murshid's volumes and what are the readings and the body of work that we're referencing or studying, and uh, what do they offer by way of practices and rules? So, Inayat Khan did so much teaching in his 16 years of like actively teaching. And he started out just giving extemporaneous speeches, just giving lectures in different places. And all of those, not all of them, but a whole lot of them were well documented, that there would be people who would like transcribe them in shorthand during his talk and wherever he was. And those talks then were edited down, that he helped edit them down, and then were um, eventually compiled and published. At some point along the way, I'm not exactly sure when it was, though I've read the date, but then I forgot it. Um, Murshid had like this wild collection of talks, of papers from talks that he gave on a huge variety of subjects. And eventually, those things were sorted into and published as what are now called the Sufi message volumes. Um, the person who brought this question said 12, but I have 14 of them on my shelf. And one of them is an index, but there are 13 of them that are actually like just texts of teachings. And somewhere along the way, Murshid decided that the chaotic jumble of themes was maybe not the most helpful way to publish things. So then he started saying, like, okay, starting with this summer school in Holland, I think Holland is where he first started doing this. He was going to give teachings on a subject, themes that were all in a particular vein, so that when they were compiled and published, they would fit together in some way. And so then he started shaping the themes of his talks so that they would be more easily publishable, more coherent in that way. So I believe that In an Eastern Rose Garden, which is volume 7, was the first one of those volumes that was really shaped according to these themes of his talks that he gave. So those are the publicly accessible texts that anybody who wants to can go online and order them and buy them. Only one of those, which is volume 12, which is the Gathas, that is which means sacred teachings. That one was woven into what Murshid established as the curriculum for the esoteric school. That was when he was saying, how do we engage in study and training murids and training students in the path of Sufism? And so he had eventually a set of papers, which was about 74 pages, that is called the Ghathakas, which is the introductory papers. And he said that these papers should be given to anyone who is expressing interest in Sufism, who is curious about it, who might want to be initiated, who is trying to like see what this is about. So that set of papers, 74 pages ish, of the Gothikas, or the Gothikas for candidates, is one of the ways that it's referred to, is before someone steps onto the Sufi path. So those are not publicly available. They're not published anywhere that I've seen in a book form. Um, I have them, probably most of you have them as a PDF or something, a file that someone sent you at some point, or printed somewhere in a spiral bound notebook on your shelf or whatever. Um, then, after someone is initiated, they're given a 3-year course of study on the Gathas, which is volume 12 in Murshid's set of Sufi message volumes. And he designed it so that it would be you spend 1 year focusing on this first set of 10 papers, and then you spend another year focusing on the second set of 10 papers, and you spend a third year focusing on this other set. And so those ones, while those ones are published, they're also part of the esoteric school curriculum. Most teachers don't function in that systematic linear way, but that is a resource that Murshid gave as a way of doing it. After the Gathas, that's 3 years of study, there's another set of papers that are also not publicly available and, well, that are really literally not publicly available, that are not published in a book, and I doubt they ever will be. And those ones are called the Gitas. So this is for murids who have been on the path for at least 3 years, and it's the course of study for years 4, 5, and 6. And the Gitas, uh, let's see, it's more advanced. It's more in-depth exploration of esoteric themes. And so if you get into these things, the Gathas is some of them are very esoterically rich in like describing spiritual themes and the process of the soul and the function of life and how the mind works and all kinds of things. But it's also a wild collection of a lot of things about culture and symbolism and how humanity is, how life is, what life in the world is about, why we do the things that we do. And so some of them are very pragmatic, and some of them seem to me very, very silly and playful. And um, so, for example, some of you know, and Samara particularly loves this, when he talks about how in the East, if you're having a conversation with someone and they yawn, then people will snap their fingers or clap their hands to bring the conversation energy back to the rhythm that it was at before. And so some of us started snapping and clapping our hands at people when they yawn in a group of people. Uh, and he has things like looking at the symbolism of mushrooms and not psychedelics, but just like mushrooms in the world and what that shape is about. Like, so some of them are very fun. Um, Now, the Gitas get more into themes of healing and concentration and meditation and about like what what this work is about in the spiritual life. Now, they're not practice oriented in that they don't give instructions about what practices should you do at what time of day for how long. They're not that kind of instruction. They're more explanation about what happens and the nature of reality. The practices now are much more elusive. That there are a lot of practices that Murshid gave very specific, detailed instructions that we have documented from correspondences, letters that he gave to people, and some of the I don't know, some of us like Sufi nerds try to gather those things and organize them and keep them and protect them and um, but he didn't write about those things in a publicly accessible way. I don't know if that answered your question. I'm going to pause the recording. Our conversation in the pause went off in some fun directions, so I need to bring myself back towards the one, the perfection of love, harmony and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of guidance. Yeah, Murshid. Murshid talked a lot about repose. That's the word he used for it, repose. And just now, as I said that, I was thinking about uh, the gesture, the physical posture of Kuan Yin, of uh, her posture of royal ease and repose. That is like she is sitting, but with one foot on the ground and Uh, I'm not quite doing it right now, but I'm kind of close sitting on my chair. I could do it if I put one foot down, where one leg is up and one arm is out and one foot is on the ground. And she's totally relaxed, totally comfortable, and also ready to go where she's called. That is a nice balance. And Mersha talked about repose a lot as an essential quality and condition of being that is neglected in life today. And this is 100 plus years ago, 110 years ago, that he was talking about the pace of life that had sped up so much and that people are constantly doing and even when they don't have to be doing something they make themselves busy doing something like he said when for example when people are on a tram when they're going somewhere in a public transportation kind of way instead of just being and looking around and observing life they're reading a newspaper because they're just taking in stimulation all the time and he talked about the necessity of repose. And he was very explicit in saying that doing until you are exhausted and then crashing is not repose. That is not it. Because there is actually an energy that is necessary and that is directed in real, useful repose. nourishing repose, and crashing is not it. And just doing all day long and then falling asleep at night is not it. That there needs to be significant periods of time during our wakeful life when we are dedicated to really nourishing the inner life, dedicated nourishment of the inner life. That's a specific, valued engagement in itself. It's not something that happens incidentally or after everything's done. So I don't know about this being versus doing thing. I don't like the versus. There's no versus. It's not one against the other. It's that we're invited to recognize how much of our energy in life is put into outer activities and engagement, and how much of our energy in life is put into inner activity and engagement. And if we are really wanting to utilize and to develop the unfoldment of the soul, we need to dedicate that intentional engagement toward understanding, seeing, perceiving, developing the relationship with the inner life. It is also important to note that the reason that that is important is because the outer life is going away, and the inner life is not going away. The outer life is ephemeral, the inner life is eternal. The physical incarnate existence is so short term. The existence of the soul is forever and always. Do you know that to be true? And I don't mean just conceptual. I don't mean like, do you agree with that idea? Does that sound like a nice notion to you? No, no. Do you know that to be true? Do you know that to be true in every fiber of your being, in every level of your consciousness, in every molecule of your physical body? Are you able to look at molecules of your physical body and say, bye bye? I know you're not going to last. Thank you for the ride. And are you able to look at what is the immortal reality of the soul that I truly am? That I want to know that so intimately and so completely that I feel so at home in that experience. Because that's really where faith comes from. It's where the truest, most pure forms of love come from. It's where we find our real safety. Now, other theme, last thing, because we only have 2 minutes left. Fear and love. I don't believe that fear and love are counterindicated. Is that the phrase for it? I think that's the phrase for it. And I don't think that we need to try to psychoanalyze fear and love. I think it's more useful to psychosynthesize fear and love, Do you understand? So psychoanalysis is taking things apart. It's looking at each individual thing. Psychosynthesis is putting things together. It's bringing them into relationship, into harmony, into understanding, and recognizing the ways that they coexist, that they co-create, that they supplement and balance each other, that they contribute to the fullness of our wisdom perspective. I know in my humanness, I can experience fear and love at the same time. I can feel afraid for myself or for someone that I care about, and I can feel the love that gives rise to that fear. I can feel the love at the foundation of that. I can also see the ways that there's some inherent, innate fear that there is around it an atmosphere of love, and they work together. That's my very limited human experience perspective about it. Let's see if we can really embody this Buddhist teaching. No part left out. A.